This week on the other side, two-tier policing in our midst as those dreadful hate speech laws cause all the trouble we warned about. They're investigating Pauline Hanson, but not Grace Tame. Albo tries to do a podcast interview and wins fewer friends than Punch the Monkey. And America's vision for Western civilization upsets the lefties. This is episode 505 of The Other Side, your look at the week that was from a classical liberal lens for the week commencing Friday, February 27, 2026. Well, that didn't take long. We warned on this show that these new hate speech laws would be used for political attacks. Pauline Hanson is now under federal police informal investigation for those comments that she made on Sky News last week.
They hate Westerners, and that's what it's all about. You know, you say, oh, well, there's good Muslims out there. Well, I'm sorry. How can you tell me there are good Muslims?
Pauline says the comments were taken out of context, but she's apologised regardless, saying she doesn't really believe that there are no good Muslims. She said she meant to speak about radical Islamism and people who support things like Sharia law, ISIS brides returning, or a world caliphate. But she then said that generally she thinks many Muslims do want a world caliphate and that she will have her say about that while she still can. Now, I don't know about you, but I want to know what our politicians actually think. I don't want them self-censoring or sugarcoating their words because they're worried about being carted off to jail by their political opponents. This isn't North Korea yet. We also warned about two-tier policing based on politics with these hate speech laws, and it's not even the end of February, and we've got that happening too. Last week, a young father was jailed for 1 year for an anti-Semitic speech at a rally in which he called Jewish people the greatest enemy to this nation. That is grossly offensive and completely wrong. But 1 year in the slammer for that? What have we become? Now, I think these laws should be tossed out and nobody should be going to jail. But if we are going to have them, then they better be applied equally. You can't throw a radical right-wing anti-Semite in jail and allow a radical left-winger to say stuff like this.
31-year-old Tame addressed a crowd estimated at 5,000 on Monday evening, calling the visiting Israeli President Isaac Herzog a war criminal and inciter of genocide, and Israel a fascist state. But it was her use of the following words that enraged many.
Say it with me, from Gadigal to Gaza, globalize the Intifada.
She also used the phrase, from the river to the sea, words interpreted by many to mean the destruction of Israel.
That's how 7 News' Chris Reason reported it this week. Grace Tame screaming, from Gadigal to Gaza, globalise the Intifada. Sure, Intifada's original meaning last century was just to shake it off, but the word carries a far more violent and terror-linked meaning these days, and she's not even under investigation for that, because she's a radical left-winger, not right-wing. See how that works? That's called two-tier policing, the thing that really destroys social cohesion and fuels radicalisation. Grace Tame is trying to deflect attention from all that appalling behaviour by now falling back on the old trick of claiming the Prime Minister is sexist. There's almost nothing as delightful as watching men who've used woke, radical, feminist nonsense to climb to the top being eaten alive by woke, radical feminist women. Grace Tame has had a difficult life. She was a child sex abuse victim of a pedophile. She deserves a lot of compassion and leeway, but she is now 31 years old. And as some abuse survivors have pointed out to me this week, she does have agency and she does have to take responsibility for her behaviour as an adult at some point. Anyway, the way these disgraceful hate speech laws are being used is full-blown UK-style two-tier policing. One rule for the left and their yucky extremists, another much tougher set of rules and enforcement for the right and our yucky extremists. Even smart conservatives in the Jewish community, like Rebel News Australia frontman Avi Yemeni, know that these laws are only going to make anti-Semitism worse, not better. Avi says the attack on Pauline Hanson is clearly politically motivated.
This is not a drill. The government is watching the polls. They're nervous and you can see it. And while I don't blame them for being scared, I do blame anyone who supported these hate speech laws in the name of the Jewish community. And yes, that includes Jewish leaders and organisations that gave cover to the Prime Minister while he pushed through this legislation that was clearly designed to silence political opponents. I said it at the time, this was never about protecting Jews. Ironically, it was always going to be used against some of our strongest defenders. Albanese used the Bondi terror attack to ram through sweeping, overreaching laws. And now, Pauline Hanson, who, unlike the Prime Minister, has shown moral clarity when it comes to the war in Gaza and the safety of Australia's Jewish community, is staring down an investigation under those very laws. If you can't see what's happening here, you're not paying attention.
Avi Yemeni from Rebel News there. When you've got a Jewish man criticising laws that have so far only been used to jail a Nazi sympathiser, you know they're bloody awful laws. But our fast disappearing opposition, the Liberal Party, are still too weak to stand up for free speech and against the ridiculous nanny state that we've become in recent decades. Make no mistake, these laws, federal and state, are an abomination. And we are right to have nothing to do with either of the two major parties in this country until one of them stands up and defends our right to free speech and explicitly says that they will repeal all these laws and review all laws that have anything to do with policing what Australians think or say. Now, don't expect the Liberal Party to do that anytime soon. If you want to know why One Nation is polling ahead of both the Liberal and the Labor Party in Victoria state election polls, watch this. It's the Liberals' Victorian opposition leader, Jess Wilson, speaking this week about the hate speech laws.
When we saw the shocking incident at the end of last year with the Bondi massacre, we as a nation had to talk about the fact that we don't have strong enough laws when it comes to hate speech. We don't have strong enough protections when it comes to minorities in this state. And I was proud to stand up and put forward a plan to combat hate and to combat the very type of hate speech that makes it harder for these communities to live in this state.
What our major party pollies are forgetting is that without free speech and freedom of thought, we have no freedom. A free, liberal, democratic nation can only have laws that protect citizens from physical harm and danger. With speech, you should only police incitement to violence. And even then, the threat should be specific and there should be evidence of it being likely to be carried out. Otherwise, the government has absolutely no place inside our heads policing our thinking and our speech, thanks. Free speech requires tolerance of the wrong, the mean, the hurtful, the offensive, and the stupid. It requires a community of emotionally mature adults who don't get offended at the drop of a hat to the point that they become emotionally crippled. Ideologies and religions need to stand up to criticism. Otherwise, they show their true weaknesses, and that's good. Freedom requires a degree of acceptance that we cannot police all the wrongs in the world and that some things will just have to be left to divine justice. Otherwise, you end up with a police state. And I'm afraid that that is pretty much where we are right now. A country with laws policing our thoughts and speech and bloody cameras all over the place watching our every move. And to the clueless strategists inside the Liberal Party, if you're wondering why Australians are wanting to vote for anyone but you or Labor, this sort of thing is why. Do yourselves a favour and wake the heck up. SmartKits Australia is the best supplier of do-it-yourself prefab home renovation kits. Carports, decks, patios and pergolas, flyover roofs, insulated roofing too. All prefabricated, fully engineered and delivered anywhere in Australia free. And if you're not too handy, they'll install it for you too. A great Aussie product from a great Aussie small business. Support them, support your lifestyle and support the other side. smartkits.com.au. Next week, we'll be dropping our first content for members of the exclusive side. We're going to be doing the other side unplugged long-form interviews, me chatting with various people, pretty much unedited, about important stuff. If you'd like to join the exclusive side, you can do so for as little as around $1 a week by heading over to our website at othersidetv.com.au, or you can just click the QR code that you see pop up below anytime during the show. It's so cute when the Canberra class take a step down from their protected ivory towers and try to get all authentic and real with the man in the street by doing podcast interviews. Of course, they'll only do the podcasts of mainstream media people like Carl Stefanovic. It was a very soft interview conducted at the Lodge with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and Carl this week. But Carl did challenge the PM on his deplorables-type view of working-class conservative Aussie battlers and recent comments about the rise of one nation and dark forces.
They're not dark forces, though. I mean, was that a poor choice in words?
Well, I'm describing Pauline Hanson, and whether you appeal to people's better instincts or whether you try to amplify divisions in society. Now, what we need in Australia is more unity, is we need to have proper discourse.
It absolutely sickens me when left-wing politicians talk about unity and discourse constantly, while they actively work to create disunity and crush discourse. The classic Marxist leftist trick: divide people into oppressed and oppressor, working class versus business, men versus women, whites versus people of colour, straights versus LGBTQI+, and now Gen Y and Z versus boomers and Gen X. Marxists have been playing deliberate division and grievance politics for 150 years. It's the only game they know. Then they have the audacity to call for unity. And as for discourse, yeah, well, it'd be nice to be able to have open discourse, but these hate speech and social media laws you keep introducing and enforcing are making that rather difficult, Albo. And don't try to tell us that you're not doing it deliberately and intentionally to shut down conversations that you don't like. And of course, if anyone disagrees with the left, the name-calling starts. They're racist and dark forces and deplorables, and then right after calling you names, they gaslight you and claim that they didn't.
What I'm talking about is the people out there who,
I'm not talking about
hard-working people.
I'm not talking about
to be
people
described as dark forces.
I've never done that,
Yeah.
Carl. So don't suggest that I have. I don't suggest that for 1 minute.
Yeah, except he did say this on a left-wing podcast with the Guardian newspaper a week earlier.
Yeah, Pauline Hanson appeals to our darkest forces.
But he was talking about Pauline Hanson herself, or was it One Nation itself, not the supporters or something? Anyway.
Most Aussies want to know why you don't stand for Australians, why we are second to in their agenda, in your agenda, why everyone else is accommodated for, and when we speak, we're labelled racists.
I'm Australian. I was born here. I stand up for Australia's interests each and every day in everything that I do. And, it's, I find it strange sometimes that people shouldn't talk down Australia. And they also shouldn't talk down what we do as a nation.
What the heck is he talking about there? The question was, why do you call patriotic, conservative, working class Australians racist? Albo later went on to claim that we're not in a recession. A recession is defined as having 2 or more quarters, 6 months or more, of your economy going backwards. Now, he's right. In overall terms, we haven't had that. We've had very low growth. But the true picture is masked by the million-plus population increase caused by recent mass immigration. If you look at GDP growth per capita, per person, which is the much more truthful measure to use, we've had negative growth per capita for 8 of the past 10 quarters, 7 consecutively. So yeah, that decline you're feeling, it's not an illusion, except to Albo.
Bob Hawke used to talk about the mob. I know how much you loved Bob Hawke, and the mob loved Bob Hawke. Have you lost the mob?
I'm here in the Lodge, Carl, so we're doing something right.
So I think genuinely people, hardworking, decent Australians, feel like they're not being heard. And I feel like you're labeling that or trying to put it into a category when it's just people are drowning out there. They're worried about how much things cost at the supermarket, and they're just vocalizing that. That's not extreme.
No, there are real pressures. But at the same time, if you look around the world, most of the economies went into recession in recent years. We didn't. We haven't had a single quarter of negative growth. That's a good thing.
Yeah, the numbers don't agree. Australian inflation is at 3.8%, the US is at 2.4%, and the UK 3.0%. GDP growth in Australia is only 1.4%, if you ignore the per capita thing, that is. And in the US, it's 2.2%, and in the UK, 1.3%. PIA VPN is a virtual private network, software you easily download on your computer, TV and phone that disguises your internet address, keeping big government and big corporates at bay. One account works on multiple devices and it's super cheap at only $3 a month for Other Side fans. Just type piavpn.com/otherside to sign up. That's piavpn.com/otherside. 1/3 of the people who watch The Other Side on YouTube haven't subscribed to the show, and it's free. Subscribing is the best way to support us because it helps to get our videos seen by more people, and it makes sure that our content will appear more often on your feed. All you got to do is click the subscribe button right below on YouTube, and did I mention it's free? Also, click the little bell and turn on the notifications so that when we post something, YouTube will let you know. Our show comes out every Friday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Australian Time. Episodes are clearly numbered and dated for your convenience. But it's easy to forget sometimes, so click subscribe, click the little bell, and if you do want to support us financially and help us get to our target of 2,500 paying supporters by April 30, you could click the join button next to the subscribe button and you'll get access to our exclusive content starting next week. A leading Australian businessman and trade expert says Australia now employs more public servants per head than any other country in the world. Mike Newman has 40 years of business experience in North Asia and serves as New South Wales Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner to the region. He told former Deputy Prime Minister John Anderson in an interview on his podcast that
in the latest numbers which were released in November, we have 2.6 million public servants across all three levels of government. It's costing us about $250 billion a year. Japan, where I'm currently living, they have 3.4 million public servants, so 800,000 more than us, pretty much costing them 250,000.
He meant to say 250 billion. So the same cost as us, except that they've got many times our population. Just let that sink in.
A country that's 5 times our population only runs on 40% of the bureaucrats and at the same cost. And I think that if we look at it, Australia now is ranked number 1 in terms of bureaucrats per head of population. I think we're a little bit over 17 people per 100 in the public service. Japan is ranked 15th and they're about 3.8 public service.
This is number 1 in the world.
Number 1 in the world. Australia by a sizable country mile.
It's a disgrace. We've become a socialist country by stealth. 2.6 million public servants out of only 10 million full-time workers, supporting the other 18 to 19 million people living here. No wonder we have a productivity problem. And every single other economic problem we've got stems from that. It's not about how fairly distributed the money is. It's about how unfairly distributed the workload and the tax burden is. Something the lefties in Labor and the Greens will never tell you. And no union is going to tell you that you need to work harder, that's for sure. Politicians used to be ethical. Old Labor people like Hawke and Keating used to tell us that we needed to tighten our belts. Not anymore. You won't hear that in soft, modern, woke Australia, where the priority at work is making sure that your pronouns are respected and your employer takes care of your mental health. We need a small number of good, productive, frontline, hard-working public servants, especially in policing and healthcare. But the rest need a thorough culling and fast, because the 9 million productive taxpayers carrying the other 20 million have just about had enough. The problem is, of course, that everybody votes, and the 7 million non-government employed taxpayers are in the minority. So that's not in any way fair. Also, we now have a public service that pays its top executives so much that the private sector can't even compete, as Mike Newman pointed out.
Look at the structure of the public service. If we take the New South Wales government as just an example, a departmental secretary or someone that runs, say, the police force or whatnot will be on $650,000, $700,000 a year. Their deputy secretaries will be probably on $450,000 to $500,000. The executive directors below that, and as the pyramid it gets wider, we're looking at $375,000 to $400,000, and then directors below that probably $250,000 to $285,000. So you're effectively creating what I think is a disturbing structure insofar as I think what it does is it engenders a sense of poor behavior, because what the system then will do, because these people realize that to get those sorts of salaries in the private sector, you would have to give a lot in the way of returns on investment, whereas that's not, the same metrics don't apply in the government. But having said that, if you think that if you've got a $10 million hierarchical structure, the upper levels are far more interested in political reliability than they are necessarily in capability. And so in a sense, it's all about serving the internal rather than trying to help the external, which is again why I would hope that one day we start to see a reverse to more technocratic staff as opposed to bureaucratic staff who really understand their industry.
Mike Newman on John Anderson's podcast there, and he has hit the nail on the head. This is why private business and capitalist countries succeed and socialist and communist countries fail. The incentives. In a capitalist country, the incentives are that you have to deliver service and real value to compete and to get paid. In a socialist system, the incentives are perverted. You have to suck up to the boss politically, and you have to play politics constantly to get promoted. And as a result, the service turns to crap. The institutions look after themselves and not the customers. The system eventually goes broke, collapses, and people suffer and die. And no, that's not an exaggeration. Socialism is not good, folks, or moral or ethical for anyone, ever. Last week on the show, we talked about how the government's broke, keeps overspending, can't borrow much more because we're in debt up to our eyeballs already, and therefore will be looking for every cent that they can take off Gen X and Boomer Aussies who've slaved and saved for years. They'll then tell Gen Z and Gen Y Aussies that their elders don't really deserve what little money they've stashed away for their retirement because they hogged all the assets, blah, blah, blah. Anything to keep the focus off the real story, which is government bloat and overspending, and the fact that the country is not productive anymore. Remember all the fuss last year about the productivity roundtable that Albo and Jimbo Chalmers put together? As Liberal Party South Australian Senator Alex Antic pointed out late last year, the biggest idea to come out of the economic reform roundtable seemed to be a spare bedroom tax and some very divisive socialist rhetoric from Jim Chalmers.
What we did hear from the Treasurer, however, though, was that the tax system is, I think he used the word, imperfect and skewed in favour of the older generations, which should be alarming language for any of the Australians who have saved for their retirement. But this, after all, is a high-spending socialist government, and we know the old adage, I think it was Margaret Thatcher who said the problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money. So I thought to myself we could come up with a couple of suggestions of things that might be considered at the next, what do we call it? Economic Reform Roundtable was the language used. What about, for example, a pet tax? Because, Australians love pets, and you could put on a sliding scale for pets. And pets produce carbon, so we don't like that. That's bad, apparently. And you could put on a sliding scale, and it also achieves the other socialist goal of creating a miserable world as well. So that is something that could be considered. A protest tax, we've seen that comfortably. You wouldn't, of course, you've got to be careful. You wouldn't want to tax Extinction Rebellion protests, just the ones where they take the Aussie flag. I thought possibly an ambition levy, because nothing upsets socialists more than personal ambition, and taxing it would achieve the twofold goal of knocking off people's hopes and dreams while also pumping money into the coffers. And there is, I think, perhaps conversation licensing fees. You could snuff out free speech. They love that. We're all into that at the moment. You can make yourself a nice little clip on the way through. Consider a range of taxes on non-state approved discussions like things about how proud we are of our country and our history. Just give yourself a nice 25% on top of that. The point is they're going to have to find ways to do it because they're spending your money like it is going out of fashion, and they're going to have to get creative. So laugh all they want about a spare bedroom tax. It's going to be something ludicrous.
Poor old Albo is having a bit of a tough week, so I thought it might be best to give the Prime Minister an opportunity to have his say and respond.
G'day, Australia. Fantastic news about our public sector. We've created 2.6 million government jobs. That's 2.6 million Australians with secure employment. Sure, it's costing $250 billion a year, but think of it as an investment in supervision. Every Australian now has their own personal bureaucrat. Some even have two. That's service with a fake and condescending smile. And we'll keep growing government employment until everyone is employed by the government, because government needs to grow. It's called leadership through expansion. The very important NDIS added 38.8% more staff in a year. That's not bloat, that's thoroughness. We now have more people administering disability services than we have actual disabled people. That ensures nobody misses out on paperwork. Critics accuse us of blowing a $7.4 billion black hole in the budget. Let me be perfectly clear, that's not a hole, that's a portal to more jobs, government jobs. Every dollar we spend creates jobs for bureaucrats who create more bureaucrats, creating more jobs. It's like bureaucratic reproduction. I call it jobception. It's the circle of bureaucracy. Hakuna Matata. Remember, Australia, we're not destroying productivity. We're creating infinite paperwork, and someone has to fill it out.
Hakuna Matata. Brilliant Rupert Degas, folks. You can check out all of Rupert's comedy on his Instagram channel at Rupert Degas. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio's speech at the Munich Security Conference in Germany earlier this month went completely viral, and it's no wonder. It has huge implications for the entire Western world, including Australia, in setting a new, more assertive and less apologetic stance from the West.
We are part of one civilization, Western civilization. We are bound to one another by the deepest bonds that nations could share, forged by centuries of shared history, Christian faith, culture, heritage, language, ancestry, and the sacrifices our forefathers made together. For we in America have no interest in being polite and orderly caretakers of the West's managed decline. Our first colonies were built by English settlers, to whom we owe not just the language we speak, but the whole of our political and legal system. Our frontiers were shaped by Scots-Irish, that proud, hardy clan from the hills of Ulster that gave us Davy Crockett and Mark Twain and Teddy Roosevelt and Neil Armstrong. Our great Midwestern heartland was built by German farmers and craftsmen. Our horses, our ranches, our rodeos, the entire romance of the cowboy archetype that became synonymous with the American West. These were born in Spain. And our largest and most iconic city was named New Amsterdam before it was named New York. We should be proud of what we achieved together in the last century, but now we must confront and embrace the opportunities of a new one. Because yesterday is over. The future is inevitable, and our destiny together awaits.
And we're going to finish the show this week by revisiting more of that iconic speech in summary, because I think it's really important. And of course, it hasn't got the attention that it should have from our Aussie mainstream media. But I first want to focus on some of the reaction. Secretary Rubio's speech has hit a nerve because he's one of the few leaders in recent decades to speak openly and proudly about the strengths of Western civilization and to defend its heritage, and in particular, its Christian origins and ethics. He says an alliance of Europe and America built on a new respect for shared Western civilization, culture, and history will rebuke and stop the forces of civilizational erasure that he says today menace both America and Europe alike. So the left absolutely hated this speech, mainly because he spoke about Western civilization having some inherent value and a culture all of its own that is important. And he actually said out loud that it's based on Christianity. It's the total opposite of the culturally dominant Marxist narrative that says Western civilization imposed itself on the world through colonization, that free market liberalism and capitalism are inherently oppressive rather than what they are, the greatest wealth creation systems history's ever known, and that Christianity imposes a false morality. Rather than being the religion that brought the world concepts of peace, forgiveness, the dignity and equality of all men in the eyes of God, which was a concept that led, of course, to the abolition of slavery. One of the most Marxists of all US politicians is New York's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or AOC as she's better known. You've no doubt seen her atrocious performance at the same conference in Munich when she was asked this question.
Would and should the U.S. actually commit U.S. troops to defend Taiwan if China were to move?
I think that this is such a, I think that this is of course a very long-standing policy of the United States.
Yeah, there's no excuse for not having a clear response ready for a question on one of the top 3 foreign policy matters on the planet at the moment. That was an appalling performance and has hopefully disqualified her from any delusions she might have had of running to be the Democratic Party's presidential nominee. The US president and the vice president were also not impressed.
I watched AOC answering questions in Munich. This was not a good look for the United States. I never really I'd never heard her speak very much. They started answering questions. She had no idea what was happening. She had no idea how to answer.
Martha, you bring me on your show and you show me the most uncomfortable 20 seconds of television I've ever seen. My takeaway from that.
There. What do you think?
Well, I think it's a person who doesn't know what she actually thinks, and it shows how thin the Democrats' policy actually is on all these very, very important questions. Look, that was embarrassing. If I had given that answer, I would say, you know what? Maybe I ought to go read a book about China and Taiwan before I go out on the world stage again. I hope that Congresswoman Cortez has the same humility. I'm skeptical.
US Vice President J.D. Vance on Fox News there. But the problem with people like AOC is that they're very popular among the deluded leftists, particularly the young. And the lefties in New York City, the heart of free market capitalism in the West, just voted for a communist as their city mayor. The guy isn't a socialist. He's a full-blown Marxist communist if you listen to his words and policies. And AOC is the Washington representative for the part of the Bronx and Queens area in New York City. And she's ideologically fully in line with Mayor Mamdani. Needless to say, AOC was particularly upset about Marco Rubio's speech, of course, and she had this to say at the Munich conference after.
Enforcing a U.S.-European alliance that is rooted in a cultural norm, a cultural nostalgia. But there was very little that was said about how that will materially benefit populations, both in the United States and in Europe.
So she's reduced Western civilization and its history and Christian roots to a cultural nostalgia, just a sentimental longing for the past by the stale, pale and male people, yucky old white men. She also said Rubio's appeal to culture in the speech was thin, because culture is ephemeral and always changing, and we should pay attention to the material foundations in the class struggle instead. Yeah, she said that. Textbook Marxism. One of the leading Christian thinkers in America and philosophers is the popular Catholic Bishop Robert Barron. He was so troubled by AOC's rant that he posted a response of his own, and it's quite powerful. Take a look at this.
All of that, everybody, is right out of the Marxist playbook. First of all, that Western culture, as Rubio invoked it, is thin. The culture that gave us all those great figures, that gave us the rule of law, that gave us respect for the rights of the individual, that gave us our democratic political system, that gave us the university system, that's thin. And your argument is, well, because cultures always change. Well, that's a banality. I mean, of course, cultures are alive, they change and evolve. Doesn't mean for a second we can't identify the key elements within a culture that gives it its character.
It sure is. And Bishop Barron says what's worrying him the most is how open and unapologetic the political left in America are becoming about their Marxism.
The mayor of New York City, the warmth of collectivism. He's calling for the confiscation of private property, of seizing the means of production. All language right out of the Communist Manifesto. Might I encourage followers of, Mayor Mamdani and AOC, talk to some of them. They're still alive, some of them. The people that fled Marxist tyranny in Europe. People laboring under it to this day in Cuba, North Korea, Venezuela, etc.
It's very concerning because we see it here in Australia among the young too. How do we get them out of this ideological mental lock they're in? Our universities are full of kids who deeply believe in socialism and who are prepared to embrace Marxism despite its repeatedly proven failure and horrific consequences in the 20th century. Anyway, let's go back to Rubio's speech, as I promised. He started by recalling the world at the end of World War II, when Soviet communism was on the march and nuclear destruction became a new fear.
And together, Europe and America prevailed. and a continent was rebuilt. Our people prospered. In time, the East and West blocks were reunited. A civilization was once again made whole. That infamous wall that had cleaved this nation into two came down, and with it, an evil empire. And the East and West became one again.
And Marco Rubio said the euphoria of that led us into a dangerous delusion that liberal democracy would prevail globally and international trade and commercial ties would somehow replace nationhood and bring endless peace.
That the rules-based global order, an overused term, would now replace the national interest, and that we would now live in a world without borders where everyone became a citizen of the world. This was a foolish idea that ignored both human nature and it ignored the lessons of over 5,000 years of recorded human history. And it has cost us dearly. In this delusion, we embraced a dogmatic vision of free and unfettered trade, even as some nations protected their economies and subsidized their companies to systematically undercut ours.
The US Secretary of State said this led to job losses in Western countries, the deindustrialization of the West, and the handing of control of our supply chains to our adversaries. He says sovereignty was outsourced to international institutions, and he took aim at what he calls the climate cult.
To appease a climate cult, we have imposed energy policies on ourselves that are impoverishing our people, even as our competitors exploit oil and coal and natural gas and anything else, not just to power their economies, but to use as leverage against our own. And in a pursuit of a world without borders, we opened our doors to an unprecedented wave of mass migration that threatens the cohesion of our societies, the continuity of our culture, and the future of our people.
Marco Rubio says only if we defend Western civilization's heritage can we begin the work of shaping our future. And he questioned the wisdom of too much and too fast economic globalization in the past 30 years.
Deindustrialization was not inevitable. It was a conscious policy choice, a decades-long economic undertaking that stripped our nations of their wealth, of their productive capacity, and of their independence. And the loss of our supply chain sovereignty was not a function of a prosperous and healthy system of global trade. It was foolish. It was a foolish but voluntary transformation of our economy that left us dependent on others for our needs and dangerously vulnerable to crisis.
The Secretary of State told the Munich Security Conference that mass migration is not a small thing of little consequence, but a crisis that's transforming and destabilizing societies all over the West. And he urged cooperation in tackling new frontiers to create a new Western century. He says we don't need to abandon the global institutions of the old order, but they must be reformed and rebuilt. And while in a perfect world, problems like Gaza, Ukraine, and Iran could be solved by diplomats and strongly worded statements, we don't live in a perfect world.
And we cannot continue to allow those who blatantly and openly threaten our citizens and endanger our global stability to shield themselves behind abstractions of international law, which they themselves routinely violate.
Wow, finally someone's saying it. International law and rules and procedures are often used as a shield by despots to hide behind. Global institutions often enable the rise of autocrats and authoritarians by applying a moral equivalence that simply doesn't exist. It's time to reclaim the West's moral leadership. It's powerful stuff. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio speaking at the Munich Security Conference last week. And that's it for this week. Don't forget to support us if you can by hitting the subscribe and the join buttons here on YouTube, telling your friends, or popping over to our website and signing up at othersidetv.com.au. We'll see you next week.